and welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving.
No, you
In
can't.
addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection.
Sorry.
This week, George Yancey joins us again, this time to talk about bigotry, Christian bigotry, and confirmation bias. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is My Bible, guaranteed the most comfortable Bible you'll ever own. My Bible. Our regular legal disclaimer, our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that would be Dr. George Yancey, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter referred to as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. This satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Notice the opinions expressed in this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy it or if it really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else to ensure your continued access, please go to MidwestOutreach.org. Click the yellow donate button and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear, this webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now, our special guest, Dr. George Yancey. Think about it. There you go. All right. So, we're here to discuss a very important topic which always seems to lurk in every social media conversation.
It is a pretty popular one. I mean, we have on the one hand, in fact, we just did a review of a book about 3 weeks ago on what the author of the book claimed was a vast increase in um, white supremacy. And I forget what the other word is. Uh, Basically, the idea that the white Christian church should take over the entire country, run the government, and all that kind of stuff. Uh,
Are you speaking of Christian nationalism?
yes, thank you. I have a 74-year-old brain issue that goes. I had that phrase in my mind like 6 seconds ago, and it just left.
Well, I've had that
Yes,
since I was
Christian
in my teens.
nationalism. Yeah. Uh, so, is there a rise in Christian nationalism or not? Yeah, well, that's not what we're talking about today. But so we kind of have been dealing with some of this because there's claims to certain sorts of things going on. I was really intrigued by a Facebook post you did, and we spoke pretty recently about that. And that's what prompted me to ask you to be on with us again. Uh, and it starts out this way: I am not one of those who is afraid to defend other Christians, just like I will defend other religious groups. So one would think I would be happy to see such a concerted effort to root out, quote, anti Christian, end quote, bias in the government. But this seems far too similar to the research response teams to me. Those were wrong when they were done by the left, and they are no better done by the right. The problem with such effort is not that anti Christian bigotry does not exist, it does, nor is the problem that anti Christian bigotry does not impact real people and is not evil, it is. The problem we saw with the bias response teams was that once we started to look for bias, then we saw it everywhere. Being intentional in looking for bias does not necessarily make us more accurate in seeing it. I do not like it with the left. They went overboard looking for bias in everyone, and I do not like it. I'm not eager to see it in the right that make that mistake as well. I think that's exactly right on. So, can you explain so we have a sense of where we're going? Then, what is bigotry, Christian bigotry, and confirmation bias, and how do we work with them?
Okay, so uh, bigotry basically is uh, that you treat people differently, or you don't like people simply for characteristics that really don't apply to that situation. So we usually think racial bigotry. If I don't like a white person simply because they're white, racial bigotry. That person did nothing to me, and yet I don't like them. So that's how we think of bigotry. Christian bigotry, I guess it depends on how you're looking at it. Are you talking about anti-Christian bigotry or Christian bigotry? I mean, basic Christian bigotry is that Christians can be bigots, that Christians can unfairly not like or mistreat people based on some sort of characteristic that they have. Sometimes it is racial, but not always. Anti-Christian bigotry is what you think it is, that people who don't like or mistreat Christians simply because they're Christians. And that exists. Now, what's tied to a lot of this is people justify it with stereotypes. So people justify racial bigotry by saying, well, don't blacks commit a lot of crimes? That sort of stuff. Same thing with anti-Christian bigotry. Aren't Christians intolerant? That sort of stuff. And then confirmation bias is a well documented phenomenon where we tend to confirm that which we already believe and want to believe, and so we start looking for evidence that supports our belief, and we dismiss evidence that doesn't. And here's where the research response teams really have been problematic, and there's work on this that shows this. You put a research response team, or let's just say 10 years ago, you put one on a college campus saying, by golly, we're going to get rid of sexism. If you face sexism, here's a research response team. What begins to happen is that people begin to see sexism everywhere. They begin to perceive things, oh, that's sexist. And it all goes to research response team. They investigate it. And all of a sudden you perceive that the college has become more sexist than it was in the past, which may well not be the case, but now you're seeing it everywhere. And I think that if we have research response teams that are looking for anti-Christian bigotry, that's what's going to happen, is that we'll start seeing it everywhere, and we'll see it where it does not exist. And so, I'm all for, hey, if there is some sort of anti-Christian bigotry happening, you say, oh, they're mistreating me because I'm a Christian. Then you could go and talk to the higher ups and have it dealt with. That seems to be the way we should deal with it with all types of bigotry, in my opinion.
Okay, so let's pick a hypothetical and see how that might play itself out. Let's say you're working in an office environment, and on your desk you have, I don't know, a little Bible verse, a little something else, some indications that you're a Christian. And your superior comes along and says, okay, you need to remove those from your desk. We don't want religions represented in this work environment.
Yeah.
Now, that could be anti-Christian bias, or it could be that there's a company policy that says we do not put religion on display here because we're focused on our business. We're not focused on arguing over religion.
Yeah.
So is that some kind of bias afoot? Are they discriminating against the person, or is there something else going on?
So the way I would answer that is look at other situations, and that'll tell you more whether this is just a general religion, we don't want to engage in it, or whether or not this is bigotry. I'll give you two examples, one from my personal life and one that's a court case. So one thing that happened in my personal life is I went to the University of Texas at Austin. And there's a lot of people who were upset if you showed any sort of Christian symbolism in your office or something like that. One day I went to a professor's office. I think I was either having a class with him or he was on one of my committees, and he was Jewish. He had a menorah up there. I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's cool.
Yeah.
And then I realized, why aren't these people complaining about his menorah? I didn't have a complaint with it. I mean, I was, hey, if he wants that up there, that's fine. I'm not going to complain. But the people who complain is someone would have, say, where the St. Joseph and Mary creche, is that the creche?
Okay.
Yeah, the creche. Yeah, creche.
Yeah.
Creche.
So those people would complain of that, but they won't complain about the menorah. To me, that's become anti-Christian bigotry. Now, here's a court case. I think it's the University of Iowa. The University of Iowa had this, what they call an all-comers policy. And in this all-comers policy, basically they said that you cannot discriminate in membership or leadership in your student clubs. And that you cannot discriminate by gender, by race, by religion. So basically, Christian organizations would have to say, hey, technically an atheist can be our president. Now, what was interesting was that while they cracked down on Christian organizations, they did not crack down on Muslim organizations. And this was found out when they actually went to case. The courts found out Muslims have in their bylaws, you have to be a Muslim to be a president or whatever leadership role. Why did you crack down on that? And I'll submit to you that was because there's some anti-Christian bigotry that was taking place.
Seems pretty clear to me.
That's an interesting case that went on to other ramifications. But to me, that's what I would look at. Because I think that there could be a legitimate argument to be made. If I have a place of business, I have customers coming in, and my value is making money, and I don't want any customer offended. So I can see a business passing a rule saying, hey, we don't want religious symbolism because we don't want that to be something that makes someone turn away and not do business. That's perfectly fair. But then I should crack down on Muslims and Jews just as much as I crack down on Christians. If I'm not, then there's something else happening.
Well, yeah, equal treatment. I mean, is one group being singled out for particularly harsh treatment? But you know what? I mean, okay, so we have this seesaw, I don't know what to call it, seesaw culture where one minute it's like one group is being particularly oppressed, let's say, the other, or perceives it. The next minute another group seems to be particularly oppressed. So when you talk about going into court, what we've seen is they've gotten different results in court than they've gotten before the authorities within a university. For instance, in a college or university, somebody goes in, somebody might bring that same complaint for, I don't know that it would happen in a university, but let's say they did, to whoever, they're not letting me put a cross on my desk, but they're letting this Muslim guy put a crescent. They're letting a Jewish guy put a menorah. Well, one of the first things they would hit you with is you're a white male. And so you just got to get used to it. Your people have been oppressing everybody else for so long. You should be okay with what we're doing here, which is kind of a way of saying you should be okay with us oppressing you. But they don't want to say it in those terms because they've already got it in their head that white people can't even be oppressed in this culture because they're the majority. So that's another dynamic that is at play in this whole bigotry conversation.
Yeah, that gets back to the identity politics dynamic of that. That there's this identity politics that divides people into oppressors and oppressed, and thus you could approach things differently. Now, I will note it was interesting that the Supreme Court just recently ruled that you can't do that, in a sense, that a white person can be discriminated against and they don't have a higher standard to prove. They don't have to prove it with a higher standard. That's my understanding. I'm not a lawyer, but that's my understanding of what the Supreme Court just ruled. So while companies can do that, if they do that, then they could get in trouble by the legal entities, because you cannot say, well, we can discriminate against you because you're white or Christian or male or what have you. That's not acceptable legally. But philosophically, I think we look at identity politics on the left and the right, there is a tendency to say, well, you're the oppressors, and therefore we don't have to treat you with the same respect we get the oppressed.
Yeah. But so now Before we even get into these situations, though, it seems that confirmation bias sets them up. It's, in other words, this is something going on in the minds of the
Hmm.
people who their behavior, it results in certain behaviors, maybe a
Yeah.
whole gamut of behaviors. And it gets back, we can follow the breadcrumbs back to the confirmation bias.
Yeah. Yeah. Confirmation bias underlies a lot of this. One way to think about confirmation bias is if you're into sports and you have a favorite team, if you're honest, and I am a Texas Longhorn fan, so that's my
Okay.
team.
Okay.
Go women's softball team. They
Okay.
crushed it. Uh, you will look for all the evidence that the referees are out to get your team. And even when there's a
Yeah.
clear foul, you tend to say, "Oh, come on, you haven't been calling that all day." Uh, and when you think they got away with it, you say, "Well, you never call it on them," when they may have just called the play before. That's confirmation bias. We look for evidence. I think this is very key. We think that we're objective searchers for truth, and we're not. We actually look for evidence that confirms our bias.
Could it be that sports analogies are the most helpful for people to
What?
understand this? Could it be that sports analogies are the most
Maybe,
helpful? I mean, because we all
yeah, maybe if you're too loyal, can't even see it there because they say, "Well, we are always right,"
we you know
But
we all have our teams. Well, most of us do. If we're into
yeah,
sports, and we
Except
know,
me.
except
Except me.
you.
I am so non-sports. Like I'm a baseball widower in the summer. I just don't.
Oh, well, I love the Cubs. And yeah, I get that. When you feel like your team has the ump is calling against your team, the ref is calling against your team. Yeah, and maybe you're wrong.
Now here's something that I thought about like about a year ago that I hope helps to put things in perspective. On average, you're probably wrong half the time. Maybe you're right more than half, maybe you're right less than half. But if there's an issue and it's 50-50 and there's a right and wrong to the issue, half the people are wrong. The problem is this. Right now, as of today, you don't know what you're wrong about. You're wrong about something. The chance of you being right about every single thing is astronomically. It's not something to consider. I know I'm wrong about something today. What I don't know is what I'm wrong about. If we remember this may give us some humbleness as we approach subjects. That you may not be so overly confident that you got to be right and there's no way you're wrong. I think people forget that, sometimes believe that there's no way they're wrong, and then that frees them up to engage in activities that they normally would not engage in. Activities where they may mistreat others in order to get their way, because after all, they're right.
Yeah. So, where are we going with this, Don?
I don't know. It looked like you had a thought about to come out of your mouth, so I just sort of.
I want to be careful. Like, this is getting into the church. We see this in the church all the time. Maybe it's easiest to see when our church life overlaps with our political life. And I mean, that's when a lot of the tensions come out between Christians. It's really interesting how, I mean, I don't know. I go back to a time in the church when we just didn't talk about politics in church.
Right.
Now, I think, I don't know. Okay, so I'm guessing that might have been unique to Chicago area white churches. I don't know. I came out of a Catholic family and into an evangelical family, and for me, I didn't notice any difference in terms of politics being discussed. It was like in my Catholic upbringing, they said, "Well, you want to avoid talking about religion and politics, because you're gonna." So we just didn't talk about it for that reason. When I went into the evangelical church, it was like they didn't even say that. It's just the same habits were there. You just didn't talk about it. So the first time I ever remember a political conversation of any kind was one that I initiated with a bunch of older people in 1980. And I was kind of like a political blank slate at the time. I didn't really know what to think. It was 1980. I just become a Christian less than 5 years ago. I When I was a Christian, right after I became a Christian, Jimmy Carter gets elected. Okay, now we have the first born again president, and so that was kind of exciting. But things haven't been going so well in the last 4 years. So people are looking for a change. And what should we really give up the Bible guy, the Southern Baptist, and go with this other guy, Reagan? I wanted to hear what people had to say. And right away, I'm in this room of older people, and I'm hearing these different. They didn't argue, they didn't quarrel, they just kind of almost reluctantly shared their opinions. And then I didn't hear politics discussed again for another several years. Once the abortion debate heated up, that's when I started really noticing it becoming a regular thing. As to whether, balanced budgets versus unbalanced budgets, should we be more aggressive militarily or not? All these things just didn't get discussed, but
Well,
abortion brought politics to the
yeah,
fore.
just to kind of step out of the whole confirmation bias sort of a question for a moment and talk about what you just read, this politic thing. I didn't grow up in the church. I became a Christian in my early 20s after my son was born. My wife did, and she says pretty much the same thing that you have said, that politics really wasn't the thing that they really talked about in church, for example, or even amongst her parents'
Really,
friends, all
among your
that.
Christian friends, really, yeah.
Now, I would suggest, and we've talked about this and written about this before, we lived in a largely Christianized, not Christian, Christianized culture. Liberals and conservatives largely had the same worldview, and saw the same problems, but didn't have the same solutions. That's where the parties kind of broke apart. So Democrats had one way to try to solve the problems that they saw. Conservatives had a different way to solve the problems, but they both saw the same problems. That began changing really in the 1980s and 90s
Yeah,
as the Christian worldview began fading from culture generally. We don't
yeah.
even see the same
But
problems.
and then in terms of how confirmation bias fits into this, I think it was during that time that we began to develop those biases. Okay,
Right. I
if
agree.
you are if you're a Democrat, you must be okay with baby murder, you know. And if you're a Republican, well, you believe in pro-life, but only up until they're born, and then you don't give a crap about anybody. You don't care about their kids. I heard both of these things
Oh,
mainly in
that's
the late
interesting.
80s. What's that?
Ah,
But that's for me. I started hearing those things in the late 80s, like from Christians who are saying, if you don't, if you are a Democrat, you're okay with killing babies, and if you're a Republican, all you care about is babies until they're born, and then you don't care about them. And they're still saying these things. This is 40 years later. They're still saying that the rhetoric, in many cases, hasn't changed at all. And so now I have a picture, a confirmation bias picture that vilifies the people on the other side.
hmm.
I'll take it.
It's interesting. A couple of things. Despite what people think, Christians, especially conservative Christians, are not active in politics more than on average than other individuals. They rank kind of in the middle.
Huh.
And probably 50, 60 years ago. In fact, here's the interesting thing. Y'all probably are old enough to remember the moral majority and Jerry Falwell.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yep. Mm-hmm.
What Falwell was reacting to was the reality that mostly conservative Christians did not get involved with politics because they saw politics as profane and they wanted the spiritual.
Right.
So Farlow was reacting to that by creating a moral majority, saying, no, we're the moral majority of this country and we need to take care of our country. So really, in fact, when you look back at the disagreement between the modernists and the fundamentalists were saying, look, we don't want to get involved with all this social gospel stuff and that sort of stuff.
Right.
We're just going to worship God and do that. They weren't necessarily very politically active. So the notion of conservative Christians being politically active really is more politically active than average is a recent one, and I'm not even sure it's true. I have to go back and look at data. There's definitely some groups that are significantly more politically active than conservative Christians, than white conservative Christians. So are white conservative Christians more than average politically active? That's an interesting question. If they are, it's not by much.
My that conversation I told you about from 1980, I learned that night that there was a lady in the room who you might consider politically active, and I never knew. I don't know if anybody else in the room knew. She had every election cycle she volunteered at the party headquarters, the Democrat Party headquarters, in her area, to do whatever work they needed to do on election night. And she said one funny thing. She said, "I just got tired of the cussing there, so I decided I'd volunteer at the Republican headquarters the next election year, and they cussed even worse than the Democrats. So I went back and worked for the Democrats." So, but she said her point of view was entirely shaped by the Great Depression.
Mm.
She and her husband married in 1929. So they eventually did get to, I forget how many years they were married before he died. More than 50 years they were married. So, but so this is 1980, 1929. Their wedding anniversary was 51 years earlier, right? Do I have the math right? Yeah. So she said, you just have to understand what the Democrat Party has done for the working man. When the Depression hit, my husband every day would take the train downtown to the downtown Chicago station. He'd look for as many jobs as he could find, and then he'd hit every stop all the way west on the Chicago Northwestern line until he got to St. Charles, and then he'd come back home with no job. Day after day after day, he would do this. And then Roosevelt started, the WPA or whatever. He eventually got a job, and she and her husband were so grateful to the Democrats that they became loyal Democrats for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. So that was what it was to her. And none of us had that experience. Nobody else in the room. I mean, literally everybody in the room there was from the generation of their children or earlier. I would have been like their grandchildren's age. Yeah. So that was, and she was probably the only person that I knew who had any political activity beyond just going to the voting booth and voting. They just didn't do it. But in the 80s, suddenly we started getting these. Don, how many pro-life mailing lists were you on?
I'm sorry, how many what?
Pro-life mailing lists. Remember all the pro-life organizations?
Yeah, I'm not on any. I never was on any of those.
Oh, I was on. There was like a dozen of them, and they all had the same people on their board of advisors: Johnny Erickson, John MacArthur. The list of all the conservative people you could think of, and they were all, political. I mean, they were all lobbying for anti-abortion legislation, and there were scads of them. So that was how I think people got drawn in. And then I think the next thing, really, frankly, was Rush Limbaugh. I just started noticing Christians listening to him. I didn't start listening to him until the 2000s, but I knew Christians listening to him in the 90s. And I think that was another, I think he had as much influence, and other, talk show hosts like him had as much influence on evangelicals today as the moral majority did, as all of those pro-life lobbying groups did. You could throw Francis Schaeffer in there. Jerry Falwell credited Francis Schaeffer with changing his mind on
Right,
Christian
Schaefer
endowment
and
politics.
Everett Koop, they were going
Everett
around
Koop.
doing whatever happened to
Yeah.
yeah. So it's
Maybe,
time. It's time to go for a break because there might be things in the Bible that you
maybe
really don't like.
maybe
So
we, yeah. And speaking of confirmation bias, what if you want a Bible that expresses your confirmation bias? So we have a commercial about that, because we all know that awkward feeling when someone in a Bible study says, I wish the Bible didn't have all those verses about hell. Or when you're having couples devotions and your spouse says, I'm just not comfortable with verses that teach a traditional view of marriage. Or when you're sitting in church and you're thinking, why do all the Bibles I read have to agree with what conservative pastors are teaching? That's why we're introducing the My Bible. It's guaranteed to be the most comfortable Bible you'll ever own. We've spent literally minutes creating a Bible you can have that's perfect for you. You used to have to go down some dark back alley to get a Bible like this, but not anymore. Just write down all the places where you want to make your Bible more comfortable for you and then email them to us or enter them into our handy online form, and the results speak for themselves. Yolanda from Portland, I'm sorry, says, now that I have my Bible, I never worried that my white male pastor sermons might actually be right. Ben from seminary says, my Bible gave me the confidence I needed to drop out of my Hebrew and Greek classes. Renee from Madison says, every single one of my anti-capitalist, anti-police, and anti-social protest chants now comes from my Bible. So when someone throws an uncomfortable verse at you, you can say, that's not in my Bible. Available from mybible.cult. So I'll hit the stop sharing button. Let's see what happens. There we go. All right. So run out and get those. And we'll have special offers now that it's not available in stores. Um, yeah.
this is kind of it's taken a little bit of a turn from what I sort of expected we do. But I have, as long as we're kind of on this question of our faith and our politics, because they really do connect together, and our confirmation biases influence how we make our decisions on voting to some degree at least. I have this kind of theory that I like about the way that voting goes. I think about 20% of those who vote are hard left. No matter what you do, they're going to vote left. 20% or so are hard right. No matter what you do, they're going to vote right. And
Do you
then I
think?
think there's this
Okay.
area between them, 60%, that range. I call them middle America. Middle America is not a location, it is a way of thinking. Middle America wants to basically be left alone. They want their kids to be taken care of. They want to work their 50 weeks a year, save up for a vacation, and go on a family vacation. They're not radically for many things. If you're gay, they're not for or against it. If you're a neighbor, just keep your grass cut and keep your yard kind of up, and we'll be fine. Uh, they're not voting one way or the other for those issues necessarily. What they do is they shift, I think, against radicalism. So they shift their kind of range from the left to the right. They're not ideologues, but whichever group tends to be seem more radical to them, they shy away from them and vote the other way. I think that's what we see happening, at least in the last 4 elections. It's worked out pretty much that way.
If you, I mean, 8 years ago when Trump was running in 2016, could you imagine him picking Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard? I mean, how many other former Democrats does he have in his cabinet? I mean, can you imagine them getting through Congress, getting
Right.
through the Senate confirmation? Can you imagine the Republicans allowing that to happen? What do you think?
Well, I I guess I don't know. I wouldn't have thought about it 4 years ago. So
Things have changed. I mean, I don't think
right.
people realize things are changing. I'm not sure what direction they're going, but I think you're
Yeah.
right in terms of the confirmation bias on the far right and the far left. Uh, I think the reason they just will never change is because of that bias. And now we're hearing testimonies. I've heard testimonies from people who've gone from Republican to Democrat that go back a while, and they always have some kind of epiphany story. That's something that cracked through, I guess you could say, their confirmation bias. And now I'm starting to hear people going the opposite direction. They have the same kind of stories. Um, but, anyways.
Well, one of the things that George brought up, getting back to this, is the office of the White House office of what? Faith. And some of the things that seem to be coming out of that, like, reporting on people who are exhibiting anti-Christian behaviors. Is that a good thing? Is that something we should be concerned about, George?
My position is to be aware that anti-Christian bigotry exists, and so when it does come up, you can deal with it. I just the experience we've learned through trying to do diversity work on college campuses is that if you emphasize this, you're gonna get a whole lot of it. Let me interject a little bit on the conversation y'all just had. Something I think a lot of Christians don't realize, as they look at the D and the R fighting it out in this country, is that the Republican Party at one point, their main constituency was conservative Christians. There's obviously other Republicans who are not conservative Christians, but that was their main constituency. I think that's no longer the case today.
Right.
Think about this. All right, so the President Trump, who's I don't think anyone mistakes him as a conservative Christian. Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, these are people who have more and more prominence in the Republican Party. So it used to be that you kind of had to at least fake being a conservative Christian in order to get the higher echelons.
Yeah.
That's no longer the case. And where an area where this is borne out now is that Trump's walking back on his commitment towards a pro-life movement.
Right.
You sort of see this. There's other characters, maybe not that high, but still influencers in the Republican Party that are not coming at it from a conservative Christian perspective. The Republican Party is opening it up more to LGBTQ, those sort of issues. So I think a lot of conservative Christians are voting for Republicans thinking that they're the party of George Bush. As far as, and they may even blast George Bush, but as far as someone who could be perceived as having Christian values and that sort of stuff. And I don't think that's the Republican Party any longer. I think it's changed. That Trump has changed it to where it is no longer the part. I mean, conservative Christians are a constituency, but they're not the constituency.
So
they're one of the special groups, but they are not the major special group. And so they can get a little bit of other Republicans, but it's not their shots to call any longer.
Can they afford to lose evangelicals? I don't know.
Probably not. At least not right. At least not today. So they have to. So what happened is that the Democrats. I have some Democrat friends who won't be happy with me saying this, but the Democrats really have, unfortunately, trafficked in Christianophobia a little bit too much. You have people like Sanders and Harris, who when they brought certain Christians in front of a hearing, suggested that they should not vote for them because of their theological beliefs. So you have a certain amount of anti-Christian animosity. So what that does, then when you think about it, is what do the Republicans have to do to keep the evangelical vote? Not hate evangelicals. I mean, that's a very low standard. I'm not saying that all Democrats hate evangelicals or anything like that, but they do sort of placate this sort of anti-Christian bias that's out there.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that the calculation that a lot of the more secular conservatives have made is that, and it's ironic because I think that this calculation Democrats have made about blacks is saying, well, you all have nowhere else to go.
Yeah, there you go.
You're gonna have to vote for us anyway. So we're not gonna mess with you. We're not gonna, we're not gonna come in and and we'll defend you, but your issues are not gonna be that important to us.
Right.
And once again, I think that that's kind of what happened with Democrats and African Americans. African Americans have felt taken advantage of because they don't feel like they can go to the Republicans, and so Democrats have not had to work as hard for their vote.
Well, when you
and
said
I think that conservative Christians are becoming the African Americans of the Republican Party.
Well, it's funny because when you said that, so I'm going to write that down. Christians have become the African Americans of the Republican Party, and I know
George Yancey, June what? 9,
yeah, right.
2025.
2025.
I'll full credit for that one.
Yeah, you got you're gonna we're gonna I'll put that in a wiki quote. Set up a wiki quote page for you. That is really good because, but I also think about what it's the Lyndon Johnson predicted that once they passed the Civil Rights Bill in '64, they would have the everlasting loyalty of the African American community. He didn't put it in those terms, but he said it
a little bit gruffer language. Yes,
he used language that is not considered appropriate today at all. It wasn't really then either. But have evangelicals become similar? Is there a parallel situation once Trump delivered on overturning Roe v. Wade?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a parallel there so that evangelicals, especially white evangelicals who've been, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of black evangelicals who've been in the pro-life movement, but
yes,
let's just say evangelicals have now, they will always remember and be grateful to the Republicans for overturning Roe v. Wade. So have they locked us up for the next 100 years?
I don't know about 100 years, but yeah, I mean, that's one of the things when I point out to evangelicals that Trump had walked back his pro-lifism, which I personally never thought was real in the first place, but that's another topic for another day.
Was Lyndon Johnson's commitment to civil rights?
Right, yeah. So, okay, so as someone's pro-life myself, I do give Trump credit for nominating judges that eventually overturned Roe versus Wade.
Yeah.
But now, in a sense, you don't have a party who could prosecute that issue. So, whereas if you had someone, let's say the president of the United States was Marco Rubio, who's very articulate on the issue of abortion and of life and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
If he was president and these things had happened, you would have someone who could articulate a pro-life vision. And because now it's down to voting in the states and this sort of things. You have to persuade people.
And
the Republicans have the presidency, but they don't have a persuader on this issue.
Right. So there's no national.
I think it's one of the reasons why you've seen not clearly not the only reason. But one of the reasons why we've seen a lot of losses for pro-lifers on the legislative level in a lot of states that this is taking place. And so you've gotten Roe versus Wade overturned, so you can legally do something. But in a sense, now you're crippled in your ability to do something because your leader. This is not an issue that he appears to really care about. He's done his part, and so he's
on to the next project, whatever.
Yeah, he said he'll tell the evangelical Christians, "Hey, I'm not going to mess with you," but he's not. I don't think he's motivated to really give them anything else.
Okay, now we have a sort of an off-topic question here, but I think we want to give it just a quick statement and see what we think about it. What should people think about Paula White in the White House faith office? End quote. Now,
what do they even do? What do they do in that faith office?
Well, theoretically, it is supposed to be guarding against anti-religious actions by, businesses, colleges, etc. So in theory.
But in practice, Paula White goes and casts out demons.
Well, she's she's a NAR, New Apostolic Reformation teacher. My take on it is really this. Trump, as I think George pointed out, it may or may not be a Christian. It doesn't seem that he really understands what the gospel is. So that's a pretty good tip off. Yesterday he said, based on something he was doing, that this should get me into heaven.
Yeah.
And his religious background is New Thought, essentially.
Yeah.
So he has some good, solid Christians around him, but I don't know that he understands theology.
I will say it was refreshing to hear him say a couple of weeks ago, he was going through this litany of things that had been accomplished, and he said, "I didn't do that. God did it."
Right.
And
There is it. Right.
and he linked it directly to his survival, and he's starting to see a little bit, I think.
Right.
But I don't know how far he's gotten. Yeah.
So what he is doing, though, is he's selecting people from all walks of life for various positions in his administration. So you have Doc Oz. He's I want to say smorgasbordian. He's a Swedenborgian. New Thought. You have I don't know, Kennedy, I think, is Roman Catholic. So you have kind of a spectrum of religious beliefs. I don't believe that factors into this question, and I don't know that that factors into the Paula White question particularly. He's friends with Paula White. That's probably why he selected her. She owns a Bible at least, and so that would give him some idea that she has some idea what it might say. Other than that, I don't know. What do
I have my own theory on the whole Paula
Okay.
White thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good.
Which I probably shouldn't say it, but
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
go
You
ahead
should
and
say
do
it.
it.
If you can't
I've
say it here,
noticed-
you can't say it anywhere.
yeah, just between us. I've noticed that Trump tends to like to surround himself, when possible, with attractive women.
Yep.
Like his lawyers, attractive woman, and that sort of thing. I think that's part of it. You have all these guys, and then Paula White. And so I think that was a major part of why he selected her, because I don't know, she's like in her late 30s or 40s. I mean, so she's still young enough, and all, and and I think that was an issue on why he selected her. To be honest, I won't go as far as saying it's the only issue, but I think it was an issue.
Yeah. So the answer is we don't know why he selected her for sure.
Yeah.
Is she the best choice for that position? Well, it depends on what it's supposed to be accomplishing. I don't think we're even clear on that. On what they're supposed to be doing as the office.
In what way would she be the most impressive figure? Depending on, I mean, what goal would she be really uniquely qualified to accomplish? I'm like you. I don't know what that office does, but I can't think. I mean, is it supposed to be like a think tank? Well, I don't think she's very qualified for that. Is it supposed to be like a goal for publicity? I think you can find a lot better people than her. Is it supposed to be a goal of people who are supposed to look after anti-religious biases? I think you find a lot better people than her. I just don't know what her qualifications is.
My
that would make it her the best choice.
Yeah. My suspicion was he wanted to get her out of the way. He wanted to get her, take her out of center stage and put her in an office somewhere and keep her busy. That was I mean, where have we seen her since then? I mean, has she been in any press conferences?
Once or twice, but pretty rare, yeah.
Yeah. By the way, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, that's when you were talking about, right?
I'm sorry, what? About
you
Kennedy?
You mentioned Senator Kennedy from
No, I think he's talking about
no, JFK, Robert Kennedy Jr.
Oh, Robert Kennedy
in the
Jr.
cabinet.
Oh, that Kennedy. Okay. So many Kennedys.
Yeah.
Well,
all right. So I think one of the things about the faith office is supposed to be is to deal with anti-Christian bigotry specifically, but that would also include other groups like anti-Semitism, for example. But that is such a high-profile thing that I don't know. I think the Republican Party is trying to deal with it. I want to be careful. I don't want to get too politicky here, frankly.
Well, okay, so we have this confirmation bias problem. It's in the church. It doesn't just affect politics, it affects religion, it
Right.
affects theological positions. I mean, I don't know, but I feel personally as a Calvinist that a lot of people look at me and they draw all these conclusions about my views and stuff, and they have not a clue. They're totally off now. And I know a lot of my fellow Calvinists who look at Arminians and Catholics and others, and they just have these really bigoted, generalizations that are not true because I used to be both of those things, and I know that they've got it wrong. And I've seen a lot of anti-dispensationalist stuff online. Don, you can relate to this, but as a former dispensationalist, I just laugh at some of the caricatures that I see.
All right.
And so, I guess I'm asking the question, isn't confirmation bias, I mean, really a symptom of a deeper problem that people are lazy and they don't want to read. They don't want to learn anything. They don't want to ask questions. You don't even, nowadays, you don't even have to be a big reader. You don't have to be a big researcher. All you have to do is know how to ask a good question. And then you go to AI, you go to Grok. They've made it so.
Don't give my students any ideas.
No. Because I've learned the hard way. You can't trust Grok or ChatGPT or probably Genesis or the others with any actual quotes. If you're looking
Right.
for source material, they're not going to quote Calvin's Institutes accurately
Right.
for probably about 10 years. I don't know. Maybe in 5 years, they'll get that figured out. I don't know why you can't figure it out, because these are public domain texts. The Beveridge's translation of the Institutes is online. Why can't you just quote it accurately? They can't. They're just not able to. So yeah, if your students try to do that, tell them they're playing with their grades. I'm sure it applies to other things too, but you can at least get a reasonably good summary to a good question that you want to ask. Do X, Y, and Z. Do these people really believe this? Do these people really believe that?
Well, if you look, all right. So if you're trying to look to find origins of confirmation bias, the people who developed the notion of confirmation bias, what they would argue is that we have, as a group, a need to think that what we're doing is the right thing, that what we're doing is the best things. So, and we see other people doing different things, and so because of this sort of social psychological need to justify our beliefs, our actions, our norms, our values, our mores, we developed what's known as confirmation bias. We look for evidence to confirm we're doing what's right, and we dismiss evidence that it's wrong, or what we believe is right, dismiss that is wrong. So I think there is something to that.
So
I will add this though.
Yeah, okay.
It is hard to think deeply about all issues all the time.
Right.
I mean, I try to keep up on certain issues. There's other issues. I'll discuss a lot of different issues. Some issues I don't discuss at all because I've not kept up with them, and I don't have the time or inclination. I have 3 young boys who are making me tired. I just don't have that sort of. I have other priorities, and so I do think that to the degree that there is I don't know if I want to call it laziness. You just can't do everything.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, okay, this is what I believe about this, and I'm just going to look for information on this. Then I think our responsibility. So I don't think we have a responsibility to do this with every single issue, because I don't think you can. But on issues that we're really going to be speaking out about, passionate about, I think we're obligated to look at the other side of things and to do it in a good faith manner, and to be open that you might be wrong on something. So if you're going to speak out on abortion, then you should, and you're pro-life, you should look at the pro-choice arguments and take them seriously.
Right.
And the best ones, not the weak ones, but the best ones, and vice versa. I think too few people do that. They speak out a lot on issues, and then they only know their side of it, or they know the caricatures of the other side of it. They've not really taken the other side of these issues that seriously. And it's difficult to do because, you're sort of putting at stake these beliefs that you've had. But I think that's a valuable lesson. I will say that there was a point in my Christian walk where I began to question whether God existed, and I took a deep dive
Hmm.
into the evidence.
Hmm.
And what's happened is it made me stronger in my faith. So I think that if you're right, or the chances are the evidence is better for you, this deep dive is going to help you. If you're wrong, then it'll help you too, because you find out that maybe I should need to change things. And that has happened in my life as well. Well, I thought one thing, and then I started looking at it and go, oh, and that has happened as well.
Right. Right.
But you were motivated, and I think everybody comes to that point with some issue in their life where. But no, what you're saying is a really good corrective. I don't want to be too hard on people and say we're just being just lazy and stuff. And I think you're right. I think it sounds like the people who are saying what you were saying, we're making a connection between cognitive dissonance and, between. I was going to say a connection to cognitive dissonance theory with cognitive bias, because we try to have a consistent worldview. We want to have everything balanced, and we but yeah, and we don't have time. I've seen this. I've seen it where people made some huge mistakes, and I wouldn't blame them really necessarily. Well, sometimes
Yeah.
depends on the mistake,
Yes. Right.
Like, for instance, during the New Era philanthropy scandal, Don, remember that one?
Oh yeah.
Where it cost millions of dollars. It put some Christian ministries out of business because it was a Ponzi scheme.
Mm.
And okay, so it's like you have a friend who looked into it, and he says it's okay because his friend looked into it and said it was okay because his friend. And that's literally what was going on. And you well, that's not due diligence. And maybe you yourself don't have the time to do the due diligence, but if you're at the board level at a Christian institution like the one I was working at that got taken for money, Wheaton College, you can probably hire somebody to do the due diligence before you put $1 million in the hands of a guy who's running a Ponzi scheme.
Right. Yeah.
So
All right. I want to ask this question quickly, and then I want to kind of start into a little wrap up area. But according to Watchman Nee, a Christian should never serve in public office. Of course, Watchman Nee had passed away many years ago. Could this teaching be another reason why civic leadership positions are mostly filled with non-Christians? Uh, I think he was at a time, which Ron's already commented on, where
yeah,
Christians largely were not involved in politics. They weren't for or against politics, really. Uh, there was a kind of a distrust, I think, for the whole political
yeah,
situation. You were kind of viewed as having to be slightly less than honest even to run for office.
it's kind of brushing with broad strokes, but
Yeah,
I think what I heard from people was, okay, it's the world. We're not of the
right,
world,
right,
but we are to be good citizens, so we should
right,
vote.
right,
But we shouldn't join that system because it's the world system, and you're going to get tainted by it. That's
right.
that's again still broad strokes, but
Yeah,
So,
I think that was the thinking back when
yeah,
conservative Christians did not get involved in politics. That's the worldly things, and we don't do worldly things.
right, yeah.
yeah,
So, I think a few things we can grant right off the face of it. There is bigotry. To what extent is unknown, and some of it is within Christian circles. Some of it is not. Unfortunately, Christians get painted with all of it. The same thing with Christian bigotry, whether it's for or against, if it's anti-Christian or if it's by Christians. There are some within the church that do live less than stellar Christian lives. Uh, and there are non-believers, and that's one of the things that I find that I think we see a lot, that maybe this is confirmation bias, is that when, for example, why do you allow um, discrimination to happen? You're a Christian, you shouldn't allow it to happen. There's some idea there that Christians have total control over how all of the population acts. How do you respond to that?
respond.
Yeah, Obviously, we do not. I think what we're held responsible for, though, is people who claim to be Christians and then engage in activities that are unchristlike. And unfortunately, some people who claim to be Christians either A, are not really Christians, or B, are very shallow in their walk. And sometimes they just fall. So, the expectation, and I think it's an unfair expectation, is that, if you're a Christian, then you're never going to see these sort of things happen. And I think that some people who don't like Christians put that expectation upon us, that they would not put on anyone else, and that is not to excuse the sins that we commit,
Right.
but it is to be realistic. That I know that there are Christians committing sins that are going to look bad on us, and the best we can do is deal with it when it comes up.
So on the confirmation question, how do we as individuals address that? Do we just ask ourselves when we think we're seeing something, to not assume that's what we're seeing, but to ask other questions to kind of deduce if that is what's going on, some bigotry, or am I just seeing stuff that isn't there?
Okay, so a basic tenet of confirmation bias is that we overemphasize evidence that supports us and underemphasize evidence that works against us. So I would say the best way to deal with it as a Christian is simply to be open to evidence that that may disconfirm your beliefs, whatever they may be. Just take it and take it seriously, and critique the evidence that you have for your beliefs. I think if you engage in that sort of process, you'll limit the amount of confirmation bias that you exhibit, but you're not going to get rid of it completely for reasons we've already gone into. And so that's not realistic. But what is realistic is that we can be more circumspect
Hmm.
in how we see things, and a little bit less eager to jump off on something without doing our due diligence, looking into the pros and cons of it. So
Right.
that's why I try to do that. I do not always succeed in doing that, but I try to do that way. I try to be honest with the evidence that may refute my beliefs, and the evidence that supports them, and try to be as open as possible. Uh, when I see issues such as a political issue, I try to, if it's a person I don't like, I try to switch out and imagine a person I do like is experiencing this. This person I do like, I try to put a person I don't like, and then I say, is this fair? So if if there's a ruling against someone and I don't like them, and I think good, they got it, then I think, well, what if this was someone I liked? Would that be a fair ruling?
Right.
I think doing things like that tries to lessen your propensity to not think through what you're asserting. So, but
Right.
there's no absolute. You're not going to get, this side of heaven. You're not going to reach perfection in dealing with confirmation bias.
Yeah. One of the things that I went to before we started the show was I went and looked at Galatians. Now this has to do with what goes on in the church, a reminder of who we are in Christ. Uh, and Paul writes that now that you are baptized into Christ, you have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male nor female, for you're all one in Christ. And if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to promise. And we tend to forget that when we start wandering off into areas of particular biases. So I think what you're suggesting is a good thing. We need to kind of think about the person, number one, ask the questions of the other side. How are they viewing this? I mean, as somebody who is pro-choice, are they anti-human life? Well, no, they're seeing other issues that they're trying to resolve. And sometimes they are falsely accusing you because they don't want to agree with you. So there's a lot of things going on in this mix.
I would,
See, yeah, go ahead.
uh, I maybe, this is the word that has occurred to me a few times this afternoon, and that is, um, maybe our real problem in many cases is just humility. In other words, if we are aware that we have the confirmation bias to begin with, that we can't know everything, we can't explore every aspect of everything. We are going to try to make the world make sense to us, and that might mean that we might not fairly assess all the evidence we see,
Right.
because we don't have time to do that. Maybe we should just say, you know what? Here's my feeling about it. Here's my thoughts. I'm trying to. I have this worldview, and I try to fit things into it. I could be wrong.
Right.
Just try to be humble.
See, and that's one of the things that George has said several times. I could be wrong. I may need to rethink this whole.
And that's humility, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, George, I really do thank you for joining us today. It was maybe a little disjointed, but I think it was an important discussion to have, because we need to be challenged in how we live our life as believers, how we make our decisions about others and what we think is going on, and maybe not be so quick to rush to judgment on individuals. And that's a really important aspect of it. Now, and we also have a link to one of your books, I think, and some other things, as well as your Facebook post, so people can get that in the description panel. Ron, would you be kind enough?
Yes, let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil Before Me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and The Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polygamus. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Oh Dehumanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Joe Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Legal advisors are from the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Director of Privacy Assurance is Wire Tapping, and original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never happened so far.
We're waiting for the day.
Waiting for the day.
And
all right.
For the black screen to go away. Is it?
Well, do you want me to let you back in?
Yeah, let me back in.
I thought I'd keep you in the dark on our way out. So
well, that was my usual.
All right.
Thank you.
Everybody else,
Thank you.
Adios.